And the Chief of Defence Staff of the Indian Armed Forces, General Anil Chauhan, said that military actions taken in the grey zone of warfare only pay dividends over a considerable period of time. He said that it requires a historical context to initiate grey zone warfare. General Chauhan was speaking at a session on the new age of warfare at the 9th Raisina dialogue.
Whenever we talk about grey zone, probably the dividends of what military action you take today, dividends may be available to you after many, many years actually, may not be at that particular moment. I think that again is important. And to start this, possibly you will have to have some kind of a historical or a dispute to this particular issue to be successful in launching this kind of warfare. So to tackle grey zone warfare, you require multiple kind of approaches because the origin may lie in a historical dispute. So you have to be very correct.
And DD India correspondent Jessica Taneja, who is at the Raisina dialogue, joins us live now from New Delhi. Well, Jessica, you know, what's the general sense of the dialogue about UN reforms?
Well, that was the focus of Dr. S. Jaishankar's session this morning. You heard some interesting tidbits there as well on the urgent need for reform, especially when it comes to the growing needs of developing nations and how we can make these multilateral institutions more inclusive and an initiative that could address the pressing needs of the global south, while talking not particularly of the United Nations, but also looking at the World Bank, the IMF. The conversation has been around, and India has been voicing this concern almost at every place. Now, one remark of Dr. Jaishankar stood out was when he said if the G20 can expand to G21, that's of course the inclusion of the African Union, why can't the P5 at the UN? So that sort of gives you a sense of the kind of sentiment developing nations and the future developed nations would be looking into, because these post-Cold War world establishments or the Western architectures no longer bear relevance to the new trade and economic policies and even otherwise for pressing social issues. We've seen the blockade at the United Nations Security Council and India's bid for the UNSC. We've had support from various quarters. Yes, and perhaps this bone of contention still remains, but the effort to reform these multilateral institutions is gaining ground, Mark.
Jessica, how effectively, have issues related to global economic recovery and India's role in it being discussed at the event?
Well, India's role certainly understood as very important in this current geo-economic scenario. And if you look at the neighboring China, foreign direct investment in China is almost at a 30-year low, 80% drop in FDI since the last financial year. So the picture looks grim for our neighbor, which has been, which of course is the second largest economy. But at this point, India, on the other hand, a country looked at as a resilient supply chain, a country which promises great economic hope for various investors in the private sector as well. Briefly touching upon the Indo-Pacific strategy, that's also going to drive a lot of economic gains for the country. And of course, as India takes center stage in that, a lot of initiatives have been in the pipeline. But for particularly this forum, I think it's a well-established fact that the Indian economy is set to grow, and there are going to be more and more opportunities for both public and private sector to come and invest more as and when the Indian economy grows further. If you look at the forecast right now, many take these forecasts as a pinch of salt, but India has maintained its consistency when it comes to its economic results. You look at the GDP, it is being said that it's set to grow at least by 6% this year. All the other economic indicators seem to favor India's current environment for more inclusivity and, of course, rather comprehensive global economic outlook.
We leave it there. Thank you very much, Jessica Taneja, for joining us from the Raisina dialogue in New Delhi. As concerns mount over the Indo-Pacific region turning into a geopolitical rallying point, there's need for dialogue, and it's become urgent DD India's Jessica Taneja caught up with the ORF US Executive Director Dhruva Jaishankar. Let's listen to what he said.
We have with us Dhruv Jaishankar. He's the Executive Director of ORF America. Thank you, Dhruv, for taking out time and speaking to DD India. We've seen a lot of discussions on both America's Indo-Pacific strategy and, to an extent, even the European Indo-Pacific strategy. It's been 2 years for the Americans and about a year and a half for the European Indo-Pacific strategy. What progress have we seen so far, and what more can we expect in the future?
So the U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy it was the first one done by this government in the U.S., the Biden administration. It follows the Indo-Pacific strategy of the Trump administration. There's actually been quite significant progress in a few areas. A lot of it has to do with the strategic relationships. So the U.S., Japan, and Korea held a historic summit in the U.S. A lot of trilateral cooperation that bridged a lot of the differences that had existed between Japan and Korea, and very concrete cooperation on defense and technology. Philippines, the U.S.-Philippines relationship has really solidified in the last Vietnam as well, a lot of trade and defense cooperation between the U.S. and Vietnam. India, of course, is a highlight. ISET is the strategic technology dialogue. And that's actually translating, I mean, it's not just words, it's translating into cooperation on semiconductors, actual investments in areas. To give one example, on 5G and 6G cooperation and standards. Defense production in India, space cooperation. We'll see some actually major developments this year. So these are just some. Australia, AUKUS, US, UK, Australia cooperating on nuclear submarines and emerging technology. So if you look around from a strategic point of view, there's been considerable progress made in the last 2 years between the US and these key relationships. The one, I would say, and through the Quad as well, the one place where I think the US has not delivered as much as we expected is on the economic policy front. They released something called IPEF, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. And while they managed to get a lot of countries to sign on, and it was not going to be about reducing tariffs, it was not a trade agreement, but they haven't been able to make as much progress, partly because of resistance in the US, domestic political resistance.